Greetings, gamers. No, I need my I need this over here if I'm gonna do that. There we go. We're good. We're fine. It's okay. You're allowed to forget something once in a while, or all the time. In my case. All right. Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 36th live stream from the MisfitGamersStudios. I am your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. Today, we're going to continue our topic from last week and the prior week, where 2 weeks ago, I discussed the origins of High Point. Last week, Kage was in the studio with me, or he remoted in and had some questions for me about that episode, and we were going more of a deep dive into the origins of High Point. And we are here for part 3, where he has more questions for me. And that's pretty much what we're just going to pretty much stick to today, is just going to be the origins of High Point. Have some things that were going on this week, so we're going to be cutting this one short. And this episode today is in lieu of Thursday, so we will not be streaming Thursday for the normal schedule. And just as a quick update, I am officially updating the schedule, so starting next week, D&D discussions will be Mondays and Fridays. It's going to work better for my schedule, and I think it'll be a lot easier to do moving forward, because right now I don't really game on Fridays, I just game on the weekends, so I think that's going to be great. But without any further delay, let's get Kage in, because he is here with me today, and we're going to finish up those questions that he has for us. So let's go guest cam, get you unmuted, and Cosmic's already here. Cosmic, welcome, thank you for joining, and welcome into the studio again. It's been so long, like a whole 24 hours.
Get out of here, dude. What are we doing? I'm here for it.
Hey, Cosmic, I did see that you sent your thing in email. I did see that. I haven't looked at it yet. I do want to have a fresh pair of eyes when we go over that on Monday. So we do have a new submission for the homebrew review on Monday,
Very nice,
which will be excellent. That is his Elemental Barrage spell.
Did he decide, or are we still helping him decide?
He sent a 3rd and 4th level version.
Okay.
So we're definitely going to get to play around with that a little bit. So that's going to be that's going to be a lot of fun. All right, so let's do a quick recap. We did this before stream, so now we can kind of go a little bit faster with it. But let's do a quick recap of what we've discussed so far, and then we'll just jump right into the next question that you had for me.
Yeah. I mean, last time, again, I loved getting to get your perspective on what my favorite thing was, and going over whether, it was what we had to discuss, like it was the anomaly.
Mm-hmm. Which is what I thought it was. I thought you would be most interested in the anomaly, where it ended up being the War of the Fallen, the Second Great War, yes, and the steps Zenith took.
The drama in the Saints, and like the drama, I don't know. Okay, I kind of felt like the girls feel when they're watching their dramas or whatever, and I'm like, oh my god, what has happened? Who is that? Are they like, all right, I have so many.
I might have to do just a whole episode on maybe just the War of the Fallen, like just that whole, or at least just the lead up to it, like do an episodic thing, because there was a lot that I mean, again, it's so interesting that it's all backdrop for the most part, like something that most people wouldn't ever like. Well, it's things that most people wouldn't ever game to, because most players don't have the mindset that I do, which is, when I first create a character, I set one goal and one goal only: become a god. Whether that's possible or not doesn't matter. My goal is that. I set that goal because basically, if that's what I'm shooting for, wherever I go, it's going to lead to greatness, right? If I'm pushing for that high of a standard, whether it's possible or not, I'm going to consistently push myself to get as close to that, and that is going to lead to interesting gameplay, interesting decisions, but also an amazing character build. You know what I mean? If you imagine a character trying to become a god, you're going to min-max, but you're going to do it from the point of view of the character, not the point of view of the paperwork. Mm-hmm. And that's what I like.
I'm here for it. I am here for it. But yeah, no, we went through that. We went through talking a little bit about how you got where you are.
All the transitions, yeah, from how basically he got to his own crystal sphere, and how High Point basically became its own thing.
Yeah, and one of the things that I don't think we actually got to it that day, but one of the questions I wanted to know is how, like, what people were there, like what other characters were in that moment when all
Right.
of that craziness
I've had
was happening.
that's right. I've had such a crazy weekend. I have not had a chance to sit down and actually. I want to have the list proper so I can answer the question properly.
That's fair.
And I just know I've had such a busy weekend. I do need to get that list for you because that is a great topic, and I think that might just be another topic for a whole
topic.
actual stream because that entire situation that like all of the things that happened leading up to that, I had so much fun thinking up and trying to figure out because again, most of that was again, a lot of this is what I was doing out of game and my representation of it in game, and that whole scenario was really representative of just how much I was learning about the history of D&D and reading up on all of the lore that already had happened, and just learning all of that was really influencing this storyline that I was making, this journey that Zenith was going on, because I didn't want to make it too much where he experienced and met everyone and everything possible, but there were some that just stood out where it's like, man, that could be a really good turning point for this storyline and it could solve a few problems and then would therefore make sense.
And so often those things fit so perfectly, and it's just like, this is exactly the piece that I needed, and it's just, I don't know, it's very cool to see it like experientially, like I've had, I think the other day I said I only had one character in High Point, and I think I was wrong. I was definitely wrong.
Oh yeah, technically there is wrong because you technically have two.
Olo.
Yeah, that we weren't thinking of Olo.
And I don't know why. But
it's because we still think of that as the podcast and not the traditional gaming session because that was fully.
Fair.
But no, that is true. That was so funny that you obviously have Olo, but
yes, he's one day you guys will get to meet Olo.
Yeah, once I upload all the episodes. I do want to at least upload what we have and see how popular it would be.
Yeah, just see what you guys think.
Okay, excellent. And then what else did you ask me yesterday or last week?
Last week.
What other
It
question?
was last week.
Yeah, because yesterday was just the normal.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Oh yes. We were talking about oaths.
And
we were
yes,
talking about how your oath carried you from where you were to where you are, and how that now affects Zenith being the god of this realm, and how it affects Dice, even though he's not out. But even we got to see a glimpse of that when we were talking about, what happened in the Discord. And, like, what does happen when he and that oath come out.
Exactly. Yeah. And what he wants to do. And we didn't even really get, even more into that. We could bring that up again as well and circle back to the Discord of essentially what that potential alternative future, because that's what it was. We can even discuss more about what it was meant to imply, as you guys gamed deeper into it, because we're probably not going to pick that storyline up again, but we can at least talk about the levels that, the levels that I put behind that of what it was meant to imply, and kind of showing you guys, what would happen if Dice gets released and does take over. But yeah, okay.
And we went over a little bit about prophecies and what they look like in your realm, and how connected they are, and yet unique they are, and how they are almost like what was the word? Oh my gosh, mantles.
Yeah,
they're almost like mantles, as in they are there to fulfill a need. A hole, like there's a vacuum here that needs, and this is what is the result of that.
Right.
So, yeah. Oh, and we talked a little bit about demon seeds.
Oh yes.
which was fun.
Yes.
And Origin Town, and how a lot of that, what you got to bring that forward, you know. But you know, it's very
Yeah,
cool.
the Demon Seed was like such an early on creation, and I was so happy when I was able to actually take it and bring it full circle back into the storyline of High Point, because it was just one of those things I didn't want to give up. I didn't really want to like leave the idea behind, but it wasn't fully fleshed out. But then once I was able to put it into the storyline and make it make sense, then it was like, okay, now I'm starting to get the vibe of this. And it really helped out once I tied it into those characters.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's very cool. Again, another puzzle piece that just fits and it goes right into place.
Oh yeah.
Um,
You're gonna. I don't know if we're gonna be able to do this on stream because again, copyright issues. So I don't know how we're gonna have to talk about it on stream, but we won't be able to do it on stream. But when I finally get to sit down and run you through some of the songs that are benchmark songs or like, you know, some of the ones that are key to the realm.
yes.
It's I really want to go over more about the overlapping in lyrics of some of the songs that have just again wound up. I chose a song for a different reason.
Yeah.
But then you listen to the rest of the lyrics and then you start to see the overlaps. So I want to talk about that on stream, but I don't know how without listening to the music. So we're gonna have to devise a way to talk more about
We're
that.
gonna have to get smart.
Yeah, because I
You
don't.
guys got any ideas? Get in the comments.
Yeah, I have no idea how to, because you can't really play even snippets of it, and we're not really going to be reviewing it, and we're not really, and I don't know if what we're doing.
Kind of a review.
I mean, technically it's transformative because we would be breaking down each lyric into what it represents. I don't know if that's considered transformative enough to play, because I don't know. I don't know the rules.
I know.
I don't have a lawyer, so
we'll get there.
someday.
Get there.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, talk more about how that all ties into play.
Yes. So I have a question. It's a question I didn't ask last time. I don't know why, but I really. So before you started creating High Point in this crystal sphere.
Mm-hmm.
You talked a little bit about what Zenith got to play with in the Emperor's Realm,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you were given a pocket dimension that you got to create. I believe, is that what the first iteration of your afterlife is or looks like? That area?
Yeah, basically when you were ascended to godhood, you were essentially given a space to create a multitude of things. Obviously an afterlife for your followers, and then essentially a home world or a home space, something that would essentially be like, again, where your god resides when he's not out and about. Just a place to live. And then you have your afterlife, which in and of itself is kind of like just an infinite, you know, it's again a pocket, kind of like a pocket dimension. So it was like an infinite space where you can kind of just play around and mess with your new god powers without burning yourself out, right? Because it wasn't a real place. It wasn't like these things existed in the concept.
You're not really expending the energy. The energy's just hanging out here with you.
Yeah, and you're playing with ideas. So eventually when you wanted to create something, because again, he gave you, like the Emperor gave you the pocket dimension, but your godlike powers could inflict the real world. But he gave you the pocket dimension kind of like a testing ground. And then he also, out of game, he had talked to me before about part of the reason why he liked to do this too is because it was seeing who if any of his players were interested in DMing. It was also kind of a way to help them build a storyline and build something that was still theirs, but kind of under his influence of like his rule sets. So it was a way for him to kind of help guide them to be a DM if they wanted to in their own space. But still like fresh with their character because it's still gaming related, right? So it's not, it was just a kind of a fun way. I really appreciated what he did to help gamers get better, and especially if they showed interest or an ability to be a DM. He in his own game, he put in ways for them to help be better and learn, and that's I think what I appreciated a lot about it is it wasn't about lessons. It wasn't about sitting down and being like, this is how you tell a story or this is how you write it. It was, again, a lot of lead by example, and not just pay attention to me while we're gaming, but like giving you a god character and giving you a pocket realm. He would be able to then be like, okay, well, have you thought about creating like an afterlife? You had to think about what the space would look like, what it would be used, how it would be used, right? Mm-hmm. So he would give in-game tasks that you would want to do for your game, but you're learning how to be a DM through them. He's and that's what I think I appreciated mostly is it was a way to game but get better at gaming.
Yes. No, that's very cool. That's very cool. I like that. I'm always curious because when I hear you talk about it, it sounds like a Star Trek holodeck.
I mean,
like basically, but you have certain programs you can run. Like this program has to be an afterlife. Make it look like whatever the heck you want to look like. You can program it to be this big, this tall, this green, this water, whatever. But like its purpose is your afterlife.
Yeah.
And over here, this is your place where you hang out. This is your little home. Your whatever. So like those are like what you can create in that dimension.
And essentially those were and those were kind of, again, in game, those were things that were required of gods. But again, it's depending on who really liked doing it, creating worlds, were the people who had the ability to be good DMs in his mind, right? Mm-hmm. So those were, and again, he never told me this. I'm just kind of inferring from what I know about now being a DM. Giving them tasks like this to see where their interests lie and where their talents are, and seeing if they want to get up to that point of being able to like actually be their own DM and run games. It's a great way to do it. It's a really good way to kind of see where people are on their creative level. And I think it helped me a lot. I think, again, by going through that really set me up to understand how I wanted to, how complex I wanted High Point to be.
Interesting.
Like by doing what he asked and by working with him on those ideas, it wasn't like he taught me how to be complex. It's just I learned what levels of complexity I wanted and what I didn't want in terms of DMing my realm.
That's interesting. So, okay, just thinking about that, like something as simple as you guys just switch roles. Like, say your character, your god character in this realm, this game, takes an NPC of his into your afterlife.
Right.
If that were to happen, y'all just real quick switch roles.
That's what he did. So when eventually you wanted to DM, he would. That's what you would use. Is you would use this side realm to build something, and then he would help you test it. He would run through it if you wanted, and basically you could start to build out your own ideas. So that's essentially where High Point started. It looks completely different now than the original ideas, but originally High Point was through him giving me these essentially like requirements for being a god. And once I started to develop that, because it was the first time, like, I had thought about my backstory, I thought about the character, but I was playing, his story. This was the first time I was building my own concept, right? And I just got hooked on it. The idea of building the afterlife, building about what it looks like, how it's going to work, why it works that way, right. Building those layers and thinking about it. And then once I just took off with that, I'm just like, this is what I want. Like, this is what I'm craving. And that's really what set me off wanting to actually make something bigger than just some campaign storylines or some, plot points. Once I made that afterlife, I'm like, I want something bigger. I want something more. Yeah. And my idea was getting too big for the standard, just the standard D&D gameplay. My ideas were getting too big for what D&D typically offered. And that's where I once I stopped gaming with them and we kind of lost contact. I had that after so long of not gaming. I just had that like draw to be like, I want to game again, but I didn't really have anything. So I just started researching. I was just like, let me just research all of the stuff I don't know about D&D. And of course you get into the rabbit holes.
Yeah.
And once and then it's just like I finally started answering questions that I had always had. But while I was a player, I wanted the answers from the context of in-game. So I never looked anything up. Like when I was a player,
yes,
if I wanted to know something and my DM was willing to tell me, great. If not, and it was a game to find out, I gamed to find out. I didn't just pull my phone out and be like, fuck it. Like there was one time where we were up against a beholder and I was like, I'm pretty sure I know something about a beholder. And I asked him, he was like, I mean, you're going to have to test it. I could have just whipped up my phone and confirmed it.
Right.
But I didn't. I wanted to play my character, And so there's so many things that I was always wanting to know but just never got. And now here I am, after so long, I'm like, you know what? Now I get to learn a lot of those things, but out of the context of that realm and just in the context of D&D.
Yeah.
And getting into the weeds and getting really deep into a lot of the lore is really where the spark happened again. And I started piecing this amazing adventure and story together. It fell into place to where I'm like, this is what I wanted to do. And that's when I finally approached everybody. I'm like, I want to start playing D&D again. I think I can do this. And I just started, and you just start, you just try. And a lot of trial and error, but we've stuck with it. And yeah, it's one of those things of really getting into a lot of the lore of what's already been written. Really inspired me to come up with my own unique story, but again, not my own unique, not of D&D, right? Not my, this is mine, it's not D&D. I was reading this and I'm like, I see the vague spots. We talked about that, right? The areas they intentionally left vague, the areas they intentionally didn't answer. And it is truly my belief that a lot of that was left there to be able to be filled in to fit the new stories that would be at. Like we were just talking about, off stream, we were just quickly talking about like the phlogiston and the flow and the way that you can travel it. And even in the they've talked about like the flow goes through all of the pretty much the crystal spheres that you've heard of, realm space, Tamriel, and all of that. But it even specifically points out that there's the prime arcane flow, or the primary, the primary inner arcane flow that goes to several that are also known. Right. But then there's the outer arcane flow that goes to over 100. And it's like, that again, I take that in meaning that there are still yet more to be discovered that way. There's more than 100. And I also take that as there are other flows. Small flows around there that aren't as big as these ones, but could lead to cul-de-sacs, in the grand scheme of things. But when you think about that, when they wrote that in, that there's this great flow that goes to all the main ones, and then there's this side flow that goes to over 100. Like 100 what? There's not 100. Now, one could make the argument, oh, those are the ones they'll keep writing books about, they'll keep writing modules and campaigns about. But I read that as, so it's a flow that literally these are open. These are vacant. You're telling me that the phlogiston continues.
Both are definitely true.
Exactly. And it's like, so that tells me that there's nothing wrong with saying that using your own, you run a spell jamming campaign where they take an offshoot off of the outer flow and find one that leads to a half dozen undiscovered, crystal spheres. That's essentially what I read from that, right? And that's when the more you dive into what they've written as canon, the more you realize that there's all of these just handouts, right? There's the flow of phlogiston that goes to over 100 undiscovered, crystal spheres. It's like, to me, that's handing you a crystal sphere. It's basically being like, here you go. You're in the flow. You're out there floating in the phlogiston just like everybody else is. Take control of one. And just the way that they describe how they all are completely unique. It's like, so that means that there's just an endless number of them, of all different sorts. Like, there's nothing wrong with. That's what I said. It's like saying that you have your own realm. It's like that's why I don't really necessarily want to call it a homebrew, because homebrew means it's a different game. Not necessarily nowadays. A lot of people call homebrew is yourself written, but back in the day, homebrew meant you weren't playing D&D. You were playing basically all of it was written yourself. Yeah. And that's where it's like, not really. It's like it's all meant to be yours. And my reasoning for why they don't really identify who the ancients are, and what their purpose was, and what type of magic was able to create like why they created the shells in the first place, like all of that, right? I think that's left vague, partially because it's also mysterious and it's a great like cliffhanger because you don't need to have all of that. But it also makes sense that it's left vague for different people to fill in those stories themselves, right? Depending on the story that you want, you can reshape what the ancients are because they're left vague intentionally. You don't have to change their purpose for D&D, but all of the other details that D&D doesn't fill in are yours to play with. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that because that's your space to play in, right? You and your players are building that narrative. And unless you're trying to market and sell a module, right? Like unless you're trying to be like what Critical Role did, that where they've created like their unless you're trying to do that and what you've created could literally change the face of D&D, then you might have a trouble with it. But if it's just for you and your game, like I look at all of these things as handouts from the creators.
If you've ever seen the more recent Spider-Man movie in the multiverse, mm-hmm. or even the Miles Morales one, mm-hmm. like the cracks and the when I kind of think about this, like I think about how each and every one of those different Spider-Mans in the Miles Morales one, they were all like different animation styles. They were different like types of animation. They were like some Looney Tunes style ones, mm-hmm. dark and broody, literally black and white. Like, they were very different vibes, but they were all meant to be Spider-Man.
Exactly.
Right? And that's what I kind of see here is there's this like beautiful multiverse out there that you can go and explore through the flow and go and see other things, other ways of magic working. Like just think about how magic works in phase, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's very different than how magic would work. Like you even said, like Zenith, it was different.
Yes.
When it was there, right? And so like how many other people will you game with and their magic system just works a little bit different.
And it makes perfect sense. As again, if you put it from the point of view of it's its own crystal sphere out in the phlogiston somewhere, and you allow, again, if you're playing D&D with at least some foundation of the rule sets and some foundation of the history, all of it would make sense. All of it ties in, right? And that's when you can really have fun. Like I said, I don't want to change the history of what happened in D&D, right? But I use the Cataclysm in the same way that Doctor Who has used, slip-ups to make doctors meet themselves, fix it, and then everything goes back to just the way it was, and that was just a moment in time, right? But that moment in time saved everything else. That's all I wanted to do with my storyline, right? Is I took the Cataclysm and said, you know what? Kind of like you were saying, like the Spider-Verse is actually a really great way to also describe it, right? The Cataclysm is similar to that. It happened, and then multiple versions of the same person, like multiple versions of Mistral and Mystara, are now talking to each other, even though they shouldn't be. Now, mine's a little bit more of some are mostly from different times and different, like some of them like, I guess different times is really mostly what they are, because I looked at it from it's permeating all space and time. The weave is basically what holds everything together. And the reason why I say that is because we know that D&D has time magic. We know that they have gods of time. We know that they have magic that can alternate or alter time, which means that the flow, the weave, the concept of the weave, if we take it for what they've described it as, if time magic exists, then the weave has to take that into account, which it tells me the weave permeates not in linearly, but the weave just permeates. So when it is in that catastrophe state of the weave being, completely undone by the death of Mystara, I don't see why there's any reason why you couldn't have a pocket situation where multiple versions of the same person could coexist, because all things are breaking down. This is just, I always like to look at it as, again, that is the eye of the storm, right? Everything's chaotic around them, but right here, things are somewhat stable, and that's where, we took action. Yes. But once it was all done, once we took the action, I didn't want my story to indicate or inflict any permanent changes on how... Because I like the way that D&D tells a story. I don't want to specifically change the lore of D&D up until the creation of High Point, because, whatever happens in High Point is me. But I did kind of just want to have a unique adventure that, would explain a lot for my realm. Mm-hmm. So being able to do that little pocket thing where, the idea that they all came together because the cataclysm happened, but fixing the cataclysm basically fixed it, right? It allowed the tear, which was the undoing of everything, to stop. And then time continued and proceeded to do what it did. Right. But unaffected by what we did, essentially. Like, that everybody doing what they did and then going back to where they needed to be.
It's like the destruction was prevented, but the aftermath still occurred.
Yeah. So we prevented the unraveling. And the thing that is interesting is Zenith kept his memories, most of them. But the idea of the implications of that, Zenith keeping his memories of what happened. The implications being that others did. But Mistral and Mystara being who they are, I trust that they have the power to withhold that information and, use it. But you can also consider that kind of like when it comes to, Doctor Who, so much that some things just bleed into the background. So, again, I didn't want to imply that things could change, but at the same time, when you look at the actions and activities of the lore based around these characters, sometimes they do things that are like, how could you have known that? Right? They just, sometimes, again, the way that you have to write a hero or a villain is that they kind of have to have the upper hand, whether it makes sense or not. So little things like this, me, putting this little drop in the pond could easily explain some other storyline where why would this person act that way? It seemed out of place, but they haven't explained it. Mm-hmm. So again, it's that whole thing of, I don't feel like it's disruptive to the lore.
Very much not.
I feel like it's one of those, I used it and I stretched it just enough to my fitting, but by telling someone this, it's not like by telling you this happened, even if you accepted it or not, it wouldn't change anything about what you know about D&D. Right. It's just one of those things where you don't know about every war, every combat, every discussion all of these NPCs were in. So what's wrong with me dropping into that bucket of their unknown history, something that, well, tell me why this would affect your knowledge of that person. Like if I told you this all happened before you met a Mystara, mm-hmm. how would that affect it? If she is so powerful and knowledgeable and knows better, or maybe because Mystara was literally the weave and at the edge of it, maybe none of her versions remember. Maybe, there's a lot of different ways where it's like, but how technically would that change what you know? If you were to, it doesn't unravel everything about D&D. It's exactly. Just one of those random stories. You could say that I was in a battle, with Greyhawk. I was with him in this battle over here, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, cool. I've never heard of that battle, but it doesn't change what I know about him. All it does is add to the lore. It adds to it, but it doesn't change what's real. You didn't tell me he lost a leg. Well, no, because you said that happened before. I knew, he has his legs, right? But if you don't change anything, you just add to that story. I don't see anything wrong with that, and I think that's kind of the point. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's why do they give you NPCs like that if not to use them and play with them, right? Like, you're supposed to use those pre-mades, so use them.
I like it. I like it indeed.
All right. So, did that answer? I think you said did that quite answer the question?
Listen, I just wanted to definitely get into the weeds of what actually we were referring to with this pocket dimension because I love
Okay,
the
good. This is
idea.
back to the original. So
That-
back
that was-
before
that
High
was the
Point.
original topic, but yes.
Yeah, so with the Emperor's Realm, it was definitely that. It was basically a gifted pocket dimension that the new gods were allowed to practice before they started actually, making changes among the real world.
No, definitely. It's phenomenal, and I'm always curious if how is a bag of holding technically a little pocket dimension?
Yes.
Now,
As far as I'm concerned, yes.
so theoretically, hypothetically speaking, do you have to be a god to control what happens inside of a pocket dimension? Because in my mind, like, you had godlike powers, which means you could do that stuff in reality. But in the pocket dimension, you're just playing around with
So
an infinite...
So
Maybe.
just by being in a pocket dimension does not grant you abilities, right? Like, so the idea of being able to do something in a pocket dimension, you would still have to be the creator, right? So imagine, like, you can go into the pocket dimension as a god and have power, or you can go into the pocket dimension as a mortal with a bunch of blocks of wood.
Mhm.
The god can take his power and morph it into things, and eventually regain some of the power. There's levels, kind of like hit points. You can regain some, but some things would be more like permanent.
Mhm.
So you can use your stuff to create, just like you can sit there and whittle all the wood. So you can sit there and bring what you brought with you and whittle it all away. But if you don't know how to plant a tree to grow more wood, unlike the god who can regain some of the power they're using to keep flowing more, and if some of the things that you create float energy back to you, it's now a reciprocal cycle where you can now create more, which will allow you to regain your power more, which allows you to create more.
So was Zenith gifted this pocket dimension and made the owner of it?
Yes.
Okay. So
It was not. He did not create it when you are in that realm. When you ascended, this was a gift from the Emperor, and it was essentially assigned to you. So you had the rights to use your powers here, but at the same time, it was always his. Like, he could always come in, scot-free. You could, like, set up boundaries and stuff with other gods, but he was always, it's basically like his land.
if he wanted to come in and say nope.
Yeah, and no matter what you did in here would never trump his power. There's nothing you could do that wouldn't bypass, like, and that was just a contingency he had, right? It's kind of like basically saying, like, hey, you can have this house, but I will always have the key, and no matter what you do, you can't change the key.
It's the master key.
Yeah.
Because I made the lock.
Yeah. Or I have a door that you can't see. So no matter what you do, I'm getting in. And that makes perfect sense, right? And it really allowed for a lot of interesting dynamicism. But again, that's that high level gameplay where it's not the normal gameplay because you're not mortals. So a lot of it was like diplomatic type of stuff, and again, creativity. And I think, again, it's because once you get to that point, you're either going to create a new character and restart as a player, or you're going to continue wanting this creative gameplay, which basically indicates you're probably on your way to being a DM. Let's fix this.
Yeah. Right.
So, and again, I always appreciated that was on the books for him. Like, it was always in his mindset to watch out for people who were ready to do more.
Right. No, I love it. But yeah, no, that was it. I love the idea of a pocket dimension. That's definitely a point I wanted to make sure I got to this time.
And what's a really cool idea? Like, I got to admit, it was pretty dope.
Yeah, and so you touched on it a second ago in your other explanation, but we were talking about the phlogiston earlier, and I really like the idea, and you were explaining a little bit about it beforehand, but I really like the idea that this area of space, this is like, in again, the best way I can describe it is just like our outer space is just, if anybody is a Trekkie out there, I'm making so many Star Trek references today. I'm sorry.
It's
All
fine.
right.
It's fine. It works.
Species 8472 has a place called fluidic space, which
Yes.
is just like the whole thing is just a fluid, right? And that's the vibe that I get here. And you were talking, it's like almost like a gaseous liquid type deal.
Yeah,
it
is a fluid, but it's like it's a fluid like gas is a fluid, but it's a multicolored rainbow-esque type of substance that just permeates everything, and that is where the crystal spheres reside in. They just float and move about within the phlogiston.
In there too, like you can't like just see through it.
Oh yeah, you can't see anything.
And if it's anything like fog, turning on lights isn't going to help.
Yeah, you can't. Basically, all you see is just swirls of color until you reach a giant wall, which is the outside of a crystal sphere.
Right, and that was the other thing. So it's like, okay, you have this wall that just appears in front of you.
Yeah, because the crystal spheres are so big, because you got to think that they encompass at least, at bare minimum, a planetary system, so at least a solar system, right?
Yes.
So they're so big that a tiny little, ship, when you finally reach it, because you can't see them through the phlogiston. So by the time you get to one, and you can see through the phlogiston to see it, you're so close, all it is, it looks like it's a wall in all directions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's it's also imagining like that is the size you are dealing with.
So it's a large part of what I want to know is when you come up to these walls, basically, there's not like a docking procedure. There's not like a, hey, this is a ship 5468. You want to let me dock? No, it's not a thing. You don't just.
There's so there are spells that there's essentially two different ways. There are spells that will open up doorways, and there are natural doorways. I don't have off the top of my head exactly how these worked, but I do remember that from the inside of a crystal sphere, because you're only in a planetary system, you still have stars, right? You still have a night sky. So how they actually describe it is, since the crystal sphere is only a planetary system, they describe the stars are all of the exit portals, the natural exit portals of a crystal sphere.
Okay.
So the crystal sphere has portals that open and close, the twinkling of the stars and all of that, but there are also spells that will open a doorway and allow a ship to pass. It's been a long time since I've read up on Spelljammer, so I don't have it all fresh to recall. But I do remember those were the two lore aspects.
Are pieces of that canon in High Point?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't change how crystal spheres work.
Okay.
So even though mine is larger than the typical size, which there's nothing that says that they have to be a certain size. So even though mine's larger than a typical certain size, just like anything, you would see distant stars even from the edge of the galaxy, and those are themselves the natural portals, and my crystal sphere works like any others.
Okay. So with this, I know that there is a little bit more that you have, what's the right word, fleshed out or sought out in the history of the crystal spheres / phlogiston for High Point, that you were talking earlier about a lot of the vague details that D&D puts in there that is meant for the people who pick it up to fill in.
Right, and that's my personal belief. But yes, I do believe that. I'm trying to pull something up here. I really like the belief that there were several aspects of the D&D lore that were left vague or unanswered, part and partial because they don't need to be, and it's just pedantic to even get there because it's not the focus. You want to be focused more on the here and now. But I also believe that there's a strong argument to be made that they're left vague and unanswered in order for people telling their own story to add their own details to it. So just like similarly, I can have, like, you can have a Mystara based on the lore in your current, campaign as a DM. And I can tell you about Zenith's interaction with Mystara and the Cataclysm. And we can have an argument about whether or not that affects your Mystara. Even though mine technically took place in her past, therefore, how does that affect your Mystara? Does it matter?
Do I have to act with my players with the knowledge if that happened? If they ask me about the Cataclysm, do I have to make sure to remember all of your lore?
Right, and that's where, and then again, there's the question of, if I try to basically play the same Mystara as you based on the lore, though, but that's not the exact same character. I'm not talking to you about what you just did. It's not the same time frame. So there's a lot of ways, and gods work in very strange, like, they can operate in strange ways too. Some gods do appear in multiple places at the same time, right?
So the avatars of themselves.
Right. So there's a lot of different ways that I look at the opportunity where I'm talking about, something that happened that could either be explained by her, having her memory wiped or choosing not to remember. So your Mystara wouldn't act any different because it's just a suppressed memory. It's like, nope, I don't need to know the future, or I don't need to, know all of that. And what was I? Sorry, I was gonna open that up. But at the same time, going deeper into that, if you wanted to discuss with your players, like, they talk about the ancients, and there is just no knowledge, right? So we're talking about an NPC that has lore and then changing the lore. Whereas when you have something like the ancients, where it's just mystery. There's nothing left over. It's just they're the ancients. They had power that none of us understand, that is not left for us, but there are things left behind.
Crystal spheres.
But if you want to take a stab and make a reason that makes sense of who they were for your storyline, and I do the same thing, again, unless we're deciding to somehow cross our storylines, that's exactly what a DM is supposed to do. Make a very compelling story. So I don't see the difference, or I don't see a big deal in that. I don't really see an issue with creating and filling in gaps in information where they were intentionally left vague to help your own storyline. Because that's to me, that's the whole point of taking D&D and telling a story off of it, right? Because you're just taking you're not retelling the same exact story every single time. You are creating it.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. Earlier we spoke either on stream or off, but I recall you saying that not necessarily all crystal spheres are the same plane of existence. Meaning that it's possible for an entirety of the internals of a crystal sphere to be a plane of existence that isn't the prime material plane.
That is my belief. Now, granted, when you actually look at... I'm actually looking up crystal spheres specifically so I could not misquote. And as far as I know... they all from the lore that D&D has written, there's always wild space inside, and wild space, like we talked about, is just the space in between, the void or the vacuum. But I'm trying to see here if they actually specifically state that it's always wild space, or if that's just an inference. Because if it's just an inference that it's always wild space, if it's always just a vacuum, then that inference is just, again, out of creativity. And therefore, I don't see any reason in believing a crystal sphere couldn't contain a plane of existence, like just an access to a plane of existence, right?
Right.
Just like the planes of existence have their own, areas, why can't a crystal sphere have basically just be a portal directly into it, right? So I would say that it's possible, but again, I'm trying to read here real quick to see if it is, if they've said it. So... So here we go. So here, actually, we can actually read a little bit of this because this is actually really good knowledge for anybody who doesn't know crystal spheres, but we can actually talk a little bit more about the details, right? So they're made of a dark ceramic material that had no gravity and appeared to be impossible to damage by any normal or magical means, and they always look the same when seen from the outside. So basically, dark ceramic. They are just, dark balls. There's a sphere wall, which is the void of wild space within. So the surface of the sphere was called the sphere wall, and separated the void of wild space within the sphere from the phlogiston, which surrounded and flowed outside of the sphere. So if you just go based off of that, you could say rules as written states there's always wild space. But it doesn't say always, it just states that the sphere wall separated the void of wild space. So in my opinion, that doesn't necessarily mean you couldn't alter once you got inside. Maybe you opened up access, but...
What's the definition of wild space then?
So wild space specifically is the empty vacuum between astronomical bodies within a crystal sphere. So wild space is essentially what we in IRL consider space. Just is the vacuum of real space. So wild space is just a fancy name for...
Does that mean that it's implied that wild space is always in the prime material plane? Or could it be implied that
well, technically no, because it's just literally wild space was empty vacuum between astronomical bodies. So you have to consider the fact that they do call it a vacuum. So if it's in another plane of existence, not every plane has the availability for a vacuum, right?
So theoretically, if we are just going to try it with one, like the Feywild, if I were to try and replace the material plane with the Feywild in a crystal sphere, would all of the definitions still work? Could you have wild space in the Feywild?
I don't know if the Feywild technically has a outer space aspect. Like, I don't know if you can leave the surface. Like, I don't know, could you build a rocket and leave the surface of the Feywild and go into outer space? Because then we're talking... Because what we're thinking about here, too, is like when you're in the Feywild, the big question is, are you in a plane of existence or are you on a planet? Because, again, wild space is mainly just a word that they're using for the idea that inside of a crystal sphere is a solar system. So, and they have to just explain the fact that off the planets there's nothing.
Do you know if in the Feywild they have, like, suns, moons, stars?
I would think so. I think they have a sky and everything, so I would assume that they do.
Interesting.
It's been a while since I've read up on the Feywild.
I'm just curious because, like, if you have stuff like that in the Feywild, and if you can navigate by stars or these heavenly bodies in the Feywild, like you can in a lot of other areas.
So here's more of a description of wild space. So the boundaries between the planet's air envelope and wild space are gradual. So between you and the vacuum. Most crystal spheres did not have an internal atmosphere and were filled with wild space instead. So, most. Now, I do believe that there is a crystal sphere that is fully enveloped in an atmosphere. I believe that's the one with the tree, the life tree. But
the life tree or the hold on, the world tree.
Yeah, the world tree.
Okay.
But again, there's these vague things. Most crystal spheres did not have an internal atmosphere and were filled with wild space instead. But if you say most, that could either mean that some had atmosphere, but also could imply something else. So that's where I'm inferring that as of High Point, yes, I believe that there can be a crystal sphere of another plane of existence. Okay. But they never explicitly say that you can. Right. Crystal spheres appeared to have the property and maintaining the emptiness of wild... Okay, so crystal spheres appeared to have the property of maintaining the emptiness of wild space inside them, preventing the phlogiston from penetrating through any portal that was opened on their surface. So that's what the crystal sphere is designed to do. So again, you could infer that rules as written says it's always wild space. But does that mean that you couldn't alter it after the fact? Maybe. Now, granted, again, this last one is a little bit weird, but it just says that we don't know anything about the crystal spheres, right? We only know that they can contain wild space and keep it away from the phlogiston. But who's to say that someone didn't practice and try to tear open an entire rift and replace all of wild space with the Feywild. And maybe see, can the crystal sphere hold that? I don't see why not, right? But you also got to understand, too, the crystal sphere is a physical object. So if you get rid of wild space, the space in between it, like what's touching the wall, right? So there's a lot of fun ideas, right? I think that these ideas are fun to play with because they're not explicitly discussed. I think that these are opportunities of discussion. But let's go back to crystal spheres real quick because there was some things I wanted to talk about too.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
So the surface of the sphere was called the sphere wall. Then you had the wild space inside, the phlogiston outside. Openings in the sphere were called portals, allowing spelljammer ships or wild space creatures to pass through and enter or exit the crystal spheres. Portals could spontaneously open and close anywhere on the sphere wall. Magical spells or magical items that reproduce these effects could also allow portals to be located. So you would basically find these portals when they were going to open. Other magic could open a new portal or collapse an existing one. Ships or creatures passing through the portal when it closed could be cut in two.
Got it. Don't be there.
Crystal shells also mark the outer limit of a deity's influence. Divine magic that emanated from a deity worshipped on a world within the crystal sphere was severely dampened or completely non-existent once you crossed this crystal sphere shell of the phlogiston, unless the deity also enjoyed considerable worship in the new location. So, talking about, like, basically if you got on a spelljammer ship that was full of your followers, you'd have a little bit more power. If you were an extremely powerful god, you'd maintain some of your power. Or if you permeated your belief in all of the crystal sphere. But most gods leaving their sphere will cut out. Now, this is also what I wanted to mention, too, because it does mention more about crystal spheres and their gods, which ties into High Point. So all known crystal shells in the phlogiston were spherical. So all of these are known to be spherical. Doesn't mean they have to be, though. Just all known ones. Again, listen to the language. All of the known ones. And there's a flow that goes off to discover hundreds. The language is there for you to fill it in on your own. The reason for this is unknown, but several hypotheses were mentioned over history. Possibilities include the naturalness of a spherical shape in a fluid akin to bubbles. So, we don't know how they were created, right? So maybe they were just naturally bubbles in the phlogiston. Like, these are hypotheses of why they're spheres. But it's just a natural shape. Maybe it's practically...
They were created, right?
Yeah, they were created by the ancients.
Okay.
But how and why they're spheres,
right.
We don't know. But again, it's only the ones that we've discovered, which means there could be ones that you randomly come across. And how would you know? You'd have to travel the whole thing. And all you ever see is a wall. So technically there's nothing that says you can't be in a diamond-shaped one. You would never know unless you fully circumference the whole thing. And so practically of ease in construction and the balance of gravity produced by the sphere would also be nice. They also speculated on the possibility of different shapes in unexplored regions of the phlogiston, such as cubical, elliptical, triangular, irregular, and even... So they've even, like, in-game lore has hypothesized that they can exist. In-game lore has said they can exist or have been theorized. They're handing it to you. They're basically saying, have fun. They can exist. This is just what we offered, right? From the very beginning, all of the ideas are literally take this and have fun. And this is where again, beyond the book thinking was written into the game from the very beginning. Was these are just ideas, guys, but then too many people, I think, got on the hype of this is what it needs to be.
Okay, so real quick, I have to get this out.
Yeah.
Right, so I have this idea, and I according to what you've just read, I am curious, and there has to be one out there. There has to be one out there, because according to what you just read, it sounds like the only gods that get power outside of a crystal sphere are those who have followers in multiple crystal spheres.
Yeah.
And it has to be in the crystal sphere you're headed to.
Yeah.
So just imagine a god whose goal it is to just take as many of their followers and spread them to like every crystal sphere there is, so that they can be a god that can offend.
Well, so why do you think I chose Mystara as one of the focal points? Not just because of her lore, but she's reused a lot. She has multiple versions of herself in the lore already, let alone all of the versions people use. She's just one of the more well-known ones, and one of the very first that I ever learned about.
So
but
if that's the case, then like somebody like a Mystara, they could go out into the
yeah,
phlogiston with and just
Yeah.
swing around some god. All right.
but that's what I'm thinking. But that's why for me it's very important to pick and choose what not for the idea of who I want acknowledged in my realm, but that's why I pick and choose who already in lore that exists to incorporate into my lore. I don't want to recreate everyone, but I don't know everyone in D&D lore. Excuse me, hiccups. I don't know every major player in D&D lore to incorporate them into mine. So I have to be picky and choosy about it.
That's right.
But that idea right there, that if they had more followers everywhere, they would be more powerful. That's why certain entities, and again, talk about mantles. No matter where you go, there's always death, right? That's a mantle that will and that's why death doesn't care about my realm. That's why death, like the actual mantle or dream, why I don't really bother including them. Like, they're there, but I don't include them as like NPCs, because why do they care about one crystal sphere? There are endless of them. To them, these are all just drops in a bucket.
So, damn it, did I lose it? I might have lost it. It was there, now it's gone. It's okay.
It'll come back. So more about the relationships of the crystal spheres. So this is interesting. So each crystal sphere had its own set of gods. So originally they were designed to have their own set of gods, but gods can travel, right? We've been talking about you can eventually spend, but originally they all had their own set with only some deities or their respective or their aspects present in more than one world. So some were around everywhere, some weren't. The gods shared planes and in some cases shared the same realms. However, the deities from different crystal spheres were bound by an ancient compact that guaranteed peace and prevented wars between deities from different worlds. So basically, if you were from one crystal shell and I was from another crystal shell, in order to prevent you and I from essentially trying to take over, there's an ancient pact from all of the deities of their own respective shells.
Interesting.
Now, granted, there are shells that are free and unused, so I can just go ahead and pass my influence. And then there are people who don't believe in treaties and who will slyly undo this pact, right? But generally speaking, it was originally designed that and again, think about this. They're writing it in. Every crystal sphere had their own set of deities, which means if you want to create your own game, DMs, and you want to create your own deities, that basically just means you're in your own crystal sphere. I'm just saying, they're really writing it out.
So here's my question. Here's the thing. It came back to me. Zenith, his crystal sphere is stupid bigger than all the other crystal spheres.
At least others that are known. Yes.
Like stupid bigger.
Yeah.
And it says that the Dawn's power is comparable to the size of his crystal sphere. Because it's like the more.
I don't think I said it comparable to the size.
Because it was talking about like how much influence you have, like.
So here we go. So the crystal shells also mark the outer limit of a deity's influence. Divine magic that emanated from a deity worshipped on a world within a crystal sphere was severely dampened or completely non-existent once one crossed the crystal sphere shell into the phlogiston, unless they also. And into other crystal spheres, unless they also enjoyed considerable worship in the new location. So it's not the crystal sphere, it's the worship, it's the follower count.
I think there's something after that.
All the spherical properties, this construction, the balance of gravity. Each has their own set of gods. Each of these have their own aspects present in more than one world. Gods shared planes and in some cases shared realms. However, the deities of different crystal spheres were bound by an ancient pact and guaranteed peace. Negatively affect the gods of other crystal spheres, only acceptable involvement against the deities.
I swear. Maybe I'm tripping.
I don't think. Yeah, they don't think there's anything specifically about the size of it.
I thought like the more.
But if you think about it, the bigger it is, the more you can have in it, which means the more followers you can have.
Exactly.
So there is something to be said about the fact that Zenith could, in relation to another crystal sphere, could amass more followers and more power in the location that he's at. Wasn't the design, it wasn't my design of why I chose such a big place, but you're right, it could lead to that.
Just to hammer out some thought process for me.
Mm-hmm.
So, in your crystal sphere, the large reason why it is the size that it is because of its connection to
phase, which is connected to proton, which is connected to our galaxy.
Yes. So
I haven't officially so this is kind of one of those interesting things. I haven't officially decided, because it's just never really come up, on the canon of whether the sphere is actually the size, larger than every other sphere, or if the space contained within it just expands differently. As in,
right.
You don't travel equal to what you're traveling across inside. Yeah. I haven't officially made that decision because there really is no reason to it really doesn't change. It's literally a detail that doesn't matter because it doesn't change anything. And again, because Zenith has never traveled in the phlogiston, it's one of those, maybe he doesn't know. And how would he know? How do you know how big the crystal is?
So my question is, on his perspective, when he is on his side,
mm-hmm.
not the proton side.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
When he's on that side, he can travel a distance and will likely eventually reach a limit at some point.
Yeah. Oh, he's gone to his crystal sphere shell. He's gone to the edge.
And so my question is, when he's on this side, is the perimeter, how much space is on this side? Is it a solar system's amount? Or is it the entire galaxy's amount, on
from the perspective inside, if he's touching the shell, as far as he knows, when he looks, basically into the center, he's seen the edge of the galaxy. Mm-hmm. So that's why the idea of whether or not the shell is actually galaxy-sized or whether the space inside is compressed mm-hmm. is the unknown part. Because traveling inside, Zenith still has to travel the length of the galaxy to get from one side to the other, mm-hmm. and that's what he sees. But whether or not he popped out and then was able to travel...
But on his side, there's no Milky Way.
There is now. There wasn't when he started.
Meaning, it's its own unique Milky Way.
Yes.
It's not the Milky Way.
Yes, he's permeated enough to where he has the galaxy, and a lot of that was once he learned about Proton. Once he visited, once he got a bunch of information, he actually worked with Blue, especially when he came over here during the Great Wars, during the restructuring and everything. They used a lot of the data from Proton to fill out a lot of the dead space and still create a lot of the uniqueness that there is. So a lot of the gods still got to create their own fleshed out ideas.
Is this before?
This is during the first Great War, when he had to get everybody in place, and during the Second Great War when there was just more power struggling. All of these things were just being put in line over the eons and whatnot of his growth. So he and the gods, once he got all the gods together, the saints, started getting everything organized. He used the data to basically allow them to create their stuff, but strategically. So he's like, hey, you can create whatever you want, but here are the most likely places you need to put them, right? And working with that basically didn't make a 1-to-1 ratio because there was no reason to make a 1-to-1. Plus, Blue doesn't have that. Even in Proton, they don't have the entire thing mapped out.
Yeah.
But used what they knew to basically make a functional, and he wanted it. And it was also testing a theory. He didn't quite know how big it was, but he knew it was bigger than most. And his theory led him to believe that it would be roughly the size of the proton galaxy, because that's where his mind led him. So it was also part and partial to fill out and see if it could work. And basically, he proved himself right. He got to a point to where, as he started making more things, I choose to believe that the closer you get to the crystal sphere shell, the weirder, just wild space acts. So the further out from the galaxy you get, the harder it is to maintain anything like gravity and things like that. So I kind of basically have, there's a buffer area where just nothing gets created because you need a traveling distance to justify a lot. And it just makes sense because, again, then you can justify why you can still see stars, which are the portals going. Yes. So there's just a lot of different reasons, but I like to have that little buffer where he can still create like stars and planets and solar systems near the edge, but they just don't quite function right, and eventually they just deteriorate, fall apart, and fall back into the main body of the galaxy.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I mean, good questions, because yeah, it's been a long time that I've just tried to decide, and I don't think it matters in the grand scheme of things, and I don't think that it because it doesn't change how the crystal sphere works. And whether you say that the crystal sphere was created and it was created this big would imply that the ancients knew about the anomaly, right? So there could be an implication there. Or it could be, I like the idea that they created the crystal spheres, and when this one was created, it just happened to contain the anomaly, which technically was connected to something bigger, and then so it started compressing space to fit. Or you could say that over the eons, the sphere was created around the anomaly, and then it grew, slowly just realizing it needed to fill up more space. However it wants to be explained, again, I don't think it matters, because in terms of traveling, it doesn't change anything. Coming in and out of my crystal sphere doesn't change anything, right? Once you travel away from it, you can't see it anyway. And once you travel up to it, it looks like anything else. And it doesn't change the lore of how crystal spheres work. It doesn't explain anything more about the ancients, because whether they knew about the anomaly or not and created this big one, and whether maybe they didn't know about the anomaly and they just created a big one just because.
Or maybe because this one was created so big, the anomaly happened to be connected to it.
Yeah, maybe the anomaly is the byproduct of such a big crystal sphere. Maybe this crystal sphere was created and they knew inside this crystal sphere the anomaly is what again, I don't think it matters, because that's the whole point. Those are the questions that we let go, because it allows us as DMs to be like, I don't need that explained. It's the ancients did it.
Yeah.
It's here. Let's move on. That's literally, you don't ask why Tamriel is the way it is, or Toriel, you don't ask those kind of questions. It's just, that's where you go. So Zenith doesn't
green instead of purple.
And that's why Zenith hasn't bothered going into the phlogiston and making a true map of it, because learning how to traverse the phlogiston in the first place, and then figuring out how to circumvent his whole thing, it's not his bother. He knows what's inside, and that's all that matters. The outside doesn't matter to him, because it's just phlogiston out there, as far as he's concerned. But that also does mean that he has no idea where he is in relation to the flow. So as far as he knows, he can be cut off completely from anything he's ever known, or he could just be down the flow.
So you could be one of the ones that are way far down the off crazy.
I could be in a spot where there is no flow, where I'm literally in just completely unknown dead phlogiston, where there is no flow. It's just there.
Phlogiston desert.
It could be and that's the thing, is he has no interest. He got what he wanted, and he has no interest in figuring out what's outside.
You know what's funny? I find it interesting, if people haven't really traveled down the phlogiston, down those other phlogiston paths, or whatever they call it, the second flow, if people really haven't gone down there, who knows if phlogiston acts differently? Because, think about how similarly the ocean acts at the beach.
Yeah.
Right? For a while, it acts, but then when you get out to sea, deep out to sea, it acts very, very different.
Well, and that's why no one actually knows whether or not the phlogiston touches the ethereal plane. So there's questions of adventure that no one's ever come back from.
And the phlogiston could even have points in its space where flow is intermittent, and it can flow to it, and it could stop to it. and you might not know when that's going to happen, or who knows how to predict that kind of stuff. But I definitely like the aspect of creativity and mystery you can use with this. This is very cool. That's why I'm excited. I got those. I'm gonna add that book to the Google Drive and the two of them actually. But that's very cool. So outside of the phlogiston, unless you're reading something.
You can talk.
What's that?
Keep talking.
I was going to say, outside of the phlogiston, I had two other little minor topics. One was the world tree, which you touched on a second ago, and I was curious. Were you saying that there's a specific, what do you call it, crystal sphere that contains the world tree? The one where the roots go into the...
Yes. So the world tree. So the world tree was a sentient tree-like cosmic structure in the world tree cosmology model that connected all of the celestial planes to each other. And then the world tree's roots were located in Dwarfholm and Avendor. Its lower branches in Greenfields, the House of Triad, and Dwemerheart, and then its main trunks in a couple other places. So basically, it spanned like
different planes of existence.
Yeah, and then normal planar travel.
That's so crazy.
Used the astral plane to pass from the prime material plane to one of the other outer planes, and all of the so normal planes should pass through the prime material plane. Servants of the god deities use the trees of kind of essential. Okay, so yeah, so most people have to use like different planes, like the astral plane, to traverse. Certain deities were able to use the tree almost like a celestial ladder of sorts to travel through. Although the tree didn't enjoy it as much.
The tree didn't enjoy it?
No, didn't enjoy them using it. Is this what?
That's right. It's sentient. That's right.
Maybe this isn't what I'm thinking of. Hang on. Maybe I misspoke when I said the world tree. Let me double check if that's exactly.
You did say something else first, and then I thought, because I originally written down world tree. What was the other thing that you said? The great tree? Did you say the great tree? No. Gosh. See, this is a moment where I wish we could rewind, like,
right
midstream. All right. Let me try this.
Yeah, I think I don't think it was specifically the world tree. I think I used part of the world tree and something else, but I'm trying to remember specifically which crystal sphere that was.
Let's see.
I'd have to dig into my older notes on that one because I don't have the exact link. But yeah, there was one that they discussed where it was like the entire sphere was basically permeated by a tree, and its roots went into the actual shell. And it's like that I remember was something that had always stuck with me when I was doing my deep dives, because I'm like, that's gotta.
And you said when you went on the outside of it, the roots weren't there.
Yeah, they don't permeate into the phlogiston, so that always like spurred an idea. I'm gonna have to look up what that one was called, because I don't specifically remember. I don't remember the exact. Yeah, I don't have the exact one here. Of course, I didn't link it, because that would be smart.
Rude.
Yeah, because the world tree just goes through all of the different.
All these trees are just regular trees.
Yeah, I just don't know if I have it saved with all my other notes. Yeah, no, I don't.
No, that's not it. Ashen tree. Well, I do have one other question.
Yes.
The last one was about because you mentioned it a couple of times in your very first stream when we talked about when you talked about your realm history, and you were talking about the actual aftermath after the cataclysm, otherwise was the Wailing Years.
Right. So that is the actual aftermath that is D&D canon.
Right.
Of and it's so funny because I always have to remember that like canon has changed, especially like in 5th edition. Really? So like for instance, like crystal spheres don't technically exist in 5th edition. Like they kind of gave up on the idea of crystal spheres, as far as I know.
Interesting.
So it's like I got to remember a lot of the stuff that's why I always talk about the fact that I am 2nd edition based, because a lot of my lore is from a time when they still used these ideas.
Interesting.
But I like these ideas. I think that these. I think these make more fun.
These ideas around 5th edition, even if they don't talk about crystal spheres.
I just think it's the idea of they went beyond it to include just more of like an open universe. But I still prefer the idea of the crystal spheres on a larger level.
Right.
But yeah, so the Wailing Years is actually essentially it's also called the Plague Years, but. And this is where I got the idea of the cataclysm, like the thing, because basically the Wailing Years was a cataclysmic time period in the chronology of Toril. So basically, again, a very specific crystal sphere, but more of just using that as the overall arcane, like, lore of D&D. And it was immediately following the death of Mystara, and essentially it was the 10-year period following her death that because she was basically all-encompassing of the weave. So her death unleashed the Wailing Years, which during these years they had the effects of the spell plague. So the spell plague and the Wailing Years went hand in hand.
And in the spell plague, was it more of like, hey, your spells don't do what they're supposed to, or I did read some lore, although I thought this was more recent lore, about like literal living spells, where spells are these monsters. Like you can encounter a roaming fireball spell monster, right? And it's just this giant ball of fire that like attacks you. Like there's craziness like that's out there, and I'm curious if this is the types of effects that they're talking about in the spell plagues or the Wailing Years.
So in terms of the Wailing Years were the time period after her death and the worst part of the spell plague, but the spell plague wasn't caused by this. It was just the worst part of it. So
the spell plague was happening before she died?
Yeah, because if we want to go into actual like of like time periods, right? So you have the actual Wailing Years, so taking place between 1385 and 1395 is the actual 10-year period of the Wailing Years. The Wailing Years was a period of 10 years during which the effects of the spell plague were at their worst. So after the death of Mystara, the weave collapsed, triggering the spell plague. Okay, so it triggered the spell plague. A cataclysm of multiversal proportion that unraveled and reshaped flesh, stone, magic, and even space and time in its wake. Yes. That fucking phrase right there, multiversal cataclysm of multiversal proportion that reshaped all of that. That tells me that I can have my story, but without actual effect.
Just think about all the craziness that happens in like any Marvel movie, man.
Right.
They do craziness, and then boom, it's all gone. Or the X-Men series, Days of Future Past, where they just completely rewrite, what half of...
Or, what you would talk about, even Star Trek did it with the newer movies.
Very much so. I think they did a fairly good job when they did that reset.
It wasn't too bad.
That was done pretty nice.
So when this happened, a storm of blue flame swept across the face of Toril and into the plains, until it reached the world of Abir, where its evident effects was also changed on that world.
When it says into the plains, does that mean into the...
I think other planes have existed. Hey, I don't really know. I'm not really sure what they mean right there. And then in the following decade, the effects of the spell plague destroyed or reshaped entire regions, killed or mutilated thousands of people, and even the gods and reality itself were forever changed. So we could even say that the spell plague technically created the anomaly for all we know. Just Zenith wasn't here for that. But again, I don't want to write it in, but it makes literally could have reshaped the size of this. It could have reshaped the size. Maybe it caused the anomaly and reshaped my whole sphere.
Bro,
but you see what I'm saying is reading into this.
Do
you see where I'm getting my inspiration? Really when you read into it, it's basically allowing a lot of that opportunity. So that's basically what the Wailing Years were now, specifically with the spell plague. So here's some of the effects that we saw from the spell plague, which basically is you have the Storm of Blue Fire, which basically just devastated anywhere it went to. And then the plague. Okay, so the Mystara's death caused the weave to collapse. Without the weave, the shadow weave was unable to maintain and collapsed as well. The breakdown of the weave was felt by all wizards across Faerun. The corrupted madness defiled the arcane forces of the weave, resulting in new magical sources. So from all of this, from the devolution of the weave, resulting in new magical sources of defiling arcane energy in the form of blue flames that destroyed Dwarmarheart and continued to spread across the multiverse. So, again, that idea of the Eye of the Storm, this was that thing sweeping across and killing everything. Creatures and individuals who came into contact with the spell plague risked being killed or being warped by its energies, in which case they were said to be plague changed. This entails massive physical mutations and often complete loss of sanity, and sometimes bestowed the creature or individual with terrible powers. Those who came in contact with the weaker version of the spell plague were sometimes lucky enough to escape with only a spell scar, which could also bestow potential magical abilities.
So the spell plague is the storm.
The storm is one thing, yes. The storm of blue fire is a manifestation of it, but it's only one aspect of it. There are other things. So the blue storm was just something that swept across many planes of existence and many crystal spheres. But here are the other effects. So effects of the spell plague. Despite efforts with the structure of magic out of balance, many spells failed or produced unreliable results. The wards of the Silvery Moon were shattered. So the wards of the Silvery Moon were a pair of magical protections that utilized a mythal and a protected Silvery Moon. They protected Silvery Moon from different threats. So basically, the first ward encompassed the area that surrounded the city, and then another one further in. So basically, just protective wards from a high society.
Right.
Was also destroyed. Effects on the gods. One of the gods died as a result of the dissolution of Mystara's home plane. Azuth was thrown from Dwarmarheart to the Nine Hells. Another god. Oh, he was tried and found guilty for the murder. Ooh, one god was transformed back into their older self.
Huh. That's rude as hell. Who's doing this judging?
These are just effects on the judge from the class.
That's right.
These are just effects happening.
Judgment.
This is just happening.
This is just
Effects on geography. The spell plague had effects on landscape, making the ground rumble, heave. Just completely changed. Rifts opened up in the Underdark beneath the Sea of the Fallen Stars, causing the level of water to drop, culling many parts of basically killing off a bunch of people. Areas, just basically just a whole bunch of different changes. I'm trying to see if there's anything like other major, but it just looks like effects on the planes. Oh, the world tree was destroyed from this, so this destroyed the world tree. Most of the outer planes were either destroyed or merged with others, creating astral dominions. Entirely new astral domains were also arose because of the spell plague. So this upheaved So you see why I say like it made sense why I was able to escape. This literally touched everything. It unraveled so much. Dormer Heart, which was Mystara's home world or personal world, was dissolved. The spell plague pulled back from the Feywild into Toral's proximity, reopening the pass between the two planes again. So made access to the Feywild again. And another god basically started a war because of it. Other effects. Waves of fire appeared everywhere, killing whatever they touched. Its energies then reanimated some of those it killed, which arose as hungry undead, known as the plague-changed ghouls. Humans that were somehow tied to the Shadowfell were affected by the spell plague and transformed into a new race called the Shadar-kai. The illusions that cloaked the settlements of Saloon failed, revealing them. Well, some of the buildings affected. Buildings were affected in places in Waterdeep. The Walking Statue appeared in the city, being rampaging. That's crazy. Tower of Twilight was hit by the Azure Flames. Yeah, so aftermath. Spell plague led to political upheaval across the land and resulted in many attempted coups, invasions, and uprisings, especially against governments and nations that had relied heavily on arcane magic for defense or control of their population. Totally makes sense.
Right.
Majority of the effects came to an end after 10 years, and most arcane magic had returned to a semblance of normality, with a handful of major changes to the way spells are cast. The number of people gifted with psionics increased exponentially after the spell plague. Some scholars believe that this was a reaction against a far realm dwelling energy of the spell plague. Some areas remained affected for about 100 years afterwards.
Wow.
And then so that ended in 1395 is when the Wailing Years ended, and in 1480 the spell plague finally came to a full end in the event known as Mystara's Return. The weave was reconstructed, and the god with the goddess and magic became what it was before the spell plague. Though some areas still have some lingering effects. So, essentially, again, because Mystara isn't fully dead, this was just one of the assassinations on her. But there was basically a 10-year period where everything was worse, but a total of like 200 years or 100 years where shit was just bad and permanently changed. But
absolutely crazy.
It's so great. It's such beautiful lore, though. I love it. I love this lore. And again, just inserting a few little like tweaks here and there can make for such an interesting adventure and a backstory.
I have so many thoughts, and I have so many rabbit trails my brain wants to go down. But when we're talking about the weave. Because the biggest reason why all of this went down is because Mystara is basically the embodiment of the weave.
Mm-hmm.
And her death basically destroyed/disrupted magic's existence throughout all of time, right? And so, when we're talking about what the weave is it like the Force? basically. But if the force was conscious,
So basically, Mistral and or her successors, Mystara, were a powerful deity known to embody who embodied the weave, right? So they were basically like kind of like in one respect, this is kind of part of where I get my influence from the mantles. Like I get that from Dresden and all of that, but I tie it in where Mystara is essentially like a created mantle. Like Mistral was the one that embodied the weave. And then that's why she keeps getting recreated, because it's a powerful thing that needs someone to hold it,
Right.
but it's powerful enough to recreate itself. So that's kind of where I started with the idea. But that's who Mistral is she embodies the weave, and basically which is the primary source of magic. So when it comes to the weave, the weave was the way which raw magic was accessed, tapped into, and used by casters of magic. The weave was the way which magic presented itself to beings for their use and flowed through the world, touching almost every corner of existence, with the exception of dead magic zones. The weave coexisted with the shadow weave, and the shadow weave is basically its opposite, because everything has to have that equal flow, right? So you look at that, there is raw magic, right? There is an essence out there that can be tapped into. The weave is how you tap into it. It is what makes magic visible or a physical to people. The reason why people can hear magic, the reason why druids can feel magic in trees, the reason why bards can hear magic in music is the weave. Like all of that, the weave isn't magic, but the weave is the magic to those who can feel it. It's the reason why we connect to it. It's the reason why magic is available, and it is the flow of magic in our perception of the world, right? Like magic's always flowing there, but if the weave wasn't there, like it wasn't, we can't touch that magic, and that magic can't touch our world. So that's why so many things got messed up, is it literally detached our connection to magic. But the weave is the connection and the flow of all of those energies.
Would you say it's loosely akin to, a wizard channeling magic through a wand or something like that? It's like, hey, this is like my conduit for interacting with magic. It's a way for me to tap into this power, whereas I wouldn't be able to otherwise. And so when it was cracked or broken or whatever that...
If we're going to use the idea of a wand, I would almost say a better way to say it is, imagine a wand that has like charges, that has the spell in it. The weave is the caster. Like the wand has the magic, it's there, but can't do shit without the weave. The weave is what allows the wand to connect to the spell inside of it and allow it, because the caster is the one that starts it, right?
Yeah.
So the wand has the spell, has the magic, but the wand can't do anything about it itself. It needs someone to connect between the magic and the wand's intent, like use, right? So in that respect, it's almost like the caster is the weave. But again, the weave is just that. It is the way which raw magic was accessed. So raw magic is out there. But in order for people to perceive it, to touch it, to work with it, and for it to have influence on our world, the weave needs to exist. Without the weave, you separate those things and shit goes awry.
When you say we, are you specifically referring to mortals or gods as well?
So that's actually really an interesting concept, because it is essentially both. Because the weave itself is what connects it is the flow of all magical power, which is why some gods just straight out died or became unpowerful or not powerful, but not all gods lost power, because divine power isn't quite the same. It's not the same level, but yes, when the weave is destroyed, it does mess with gods as well.
So you said
I can actually go over some more descriptions
Go
too.
ahead.
So the weave considered many things, including the weave was considered many things, including Mystara's body, the source of magic, all the studies of casters, arcane and the divine alike. So there goes your answer. And many energies and forces that existed around the planes. Many saw it as the fabric on which magic was drawn, and damaging the fabric caused magic to go awry. Preparing a spell was a means by which a small amount of the weave could be contained and transported for a specific effect, while the casting of a spell was equivalent to telling the weave to rearrange itself to create the effect. So does that make sense?
Yes, it
So
does.
preparing a spell means you're basically bottling or containing the weave to transport into the effect, whereas casting is telling the weave to rearrange itself for the effect you want.
So, okay, this is, I don't know if this is going to work for you.
But the next part, may be more important, so hold on to that if you need to. Importantly, the weave was not magic itself, but rather a force by which it flows. The flows could be channeled, and by means which magic could be understood and harnessed.
This might exactly. So the way this is being described is a lot like Final Fantasy VII, and you're slotting your different orbs,
your mana, yeah,
your different mana orbs. They can do different
or materia.
Yeah, your materia. There you go. And they can do different things. Like I'm going to prepare my Flamaga or whatever it's called.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I'm going to prepare this one. I'm going to bring this one with me. I'm preparing these spells, and now whenever I need to, I can use that one.
Yeah.
Because I have it on
Mm-hmm.
when I'm in battle. That's the same thing with your prepared spells.
Yeah, so this is just basically saying that when you prepare a spell, you're basically manipulating the weave and holding on to it, and then when you're time to cast the spell, you're basically using that to have the weave.
But like that next line says, the weave isn't the magic itself, so it's almost like that those materia. Like the weave is the materia, but it's containing magic.
Yes,
the
it's
it
is the flow of the magic, but it isn't the magic itself. It's just how you get to the magic.
That's very cool.
So it isn't magic; it is the force that it's channeled. In the years after the spell plague, the term weave also became synonymous with the use of magic. So although it was not. So it was not true either. So the term weave also became synonymous with the use of magic. So people thought using the weave and using magic was the same thing, but it's not, right? Other systems for calling upon magic had also existed within the realms, but the weave was by far the most commonly used, thoroughly refined, the best and understood. So this is where we get into some of my stuff.
I was just
and
about to ask.
is the weave, it does say the weave does contact divine and regular magic, but it also doesn't define all of it. So there are levels of divine magic beyond the weave, within the weave, and there's magic outside the weave, which is where I started to get into how I got influenced in dividing the magic the way I did, because I started dividing the magic in the mindset of how are you controlling and operating the weave, and whether or not you're operating within the weave.
So, mages. Do they use the weave?
Yes.
Or do they access it otherwise?
No. So mages are the traditional. In my breakdown, the mages were the traditional by the book kind of spellcasters. So
okay, correction. I don't mean mages then. Maybe I mean the ones that just manipulate raw magic.
Oh, wizards. Yeah. So the wizards, like the actual raw magic. So those ones do not use the weave.
That's what I thought.
They don't use the weave traditionally because they have an innate ability, which is again why it's raw but uncontrolled, because like we talked about, this one's very well understood, it's very manipulatable.
Yes.
But a wizard just has a net. So basically a wizard, imagine how Mystara is with the weave. That's basically, a wizard has their own version, like their own custom weave with magic. They have their own custom weave. They don't touch the main weave. It's almost as if they have their own. They have a connection to the magic themselves. And same thing with music. I kind of consider music its own weave, which is why music has its own level of...
Okay.
Which is why it's more powerful.
Okay, so with that, so... No, I get it. I get it.
But that's how I started to break down the different ways I wanted to approach magic, because once you start to realize what the weave was and what it isn't, you start to realize that magic isn't what you think it is. And that's when you get to have fun with it.
Very, very, very much so.
So other systems calling upon magic had already existed, blah, blah, blah. But the weave is, again, just the most powerful, the most common. The weave is also linked to fate. The weave was also linked to fate, and a rare few individuals could manipulate such connections to alter the future to their advantage. However, usually the weave punished those who used her in such a way.
Facts.
Some textbooks deliberately falsified the nature of the weave as an attempt to limit knowledge associated with spellcasting. We went over this when you asked me the questions about how in the War of the Mages, how they intended to take control.
Yes.
And that was one of their techniques, control the knowledge. Control the
100%.
knowledge, then you control the ability. So this is right here. Textbooks were deliberately falsified in order to limit people. That's
So
already
it's like,
in
yes,
canon.
You can do, bro. And you know what's crazy? Like,
It was already in canon, and that's exactly
Yes.
what they did in
Yes.
my realm. So I'm using what they've already done to basically fill in the gaps. The weave did not exist on a certain place, making casting magic in that world would be difficult. Spellfire was the raw magic energy of the weave. Some people had the rare talent for manipulating this underlying energy, producing many magical effects. Silverfire was a similar ability granted by Mystara only to the chosen of Mystara, that enabled the users to envelop themselves in a silvery white flame that bestowed many potent magical powers. So Silverfire was something specific that Mystara had learned.
for her people.
But Spellfire is the closest thing to wielding raw magic at its rawest. Like, even wizards don't use that level of raw magic, right? They use more raw connection to magic, but Spellfire is like the closest thing to ripping magic out of its plane of existence and into yours. It's essentially the only thing more powerful than Spellfire would be like soul magic.
So if a regular wizard were to go up against somebody using spell magic
Like
or
Spellfire,
spellfire,
the only thing that the only hope that you have is have equal or stronger Spellfire, or you better be tapping into soul magic. Because there's not much else that's going to help you.
is it that much of a difference? Is it like
Soul magic
No. Spellfire
compared to what?
compared to just being a wizard.
Oh yeah.
It's-
Like Spellfire is, as I say, it was the raw magical energy of the weave. Like the weave is what helps you tap into raw magic. This is basically like you're touching the very edge of that connection.
So you're like putting your hand in the materia and like getting that up.
Yeah, no, Spellfire is like just straight up you're almost touching magic itself. Like, remember, the weave is how you use magic. This is almost touching magic itself.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah. So
And-
Spellfire is
and-
insane.
And Silverfire is a more potent version of that.
So I think Spellfire is actually more potent. So Spellfire was a form of raw magic, being the raw energy of the weave and a very magical power. It was highly coveted by Faerun and allowed the users to absorb spell. So it also it allows users, if you can use Spellfire, you can use it to absorb spells cast at you, internally converting it into raw magical energy and then use it in a myriad of ways. So basically, use that to harness energy.
You throw a 5th level spell at me, guess what? Now I got 5th level spell slot back.
Right. Spellfire energies could be used to heal, to protect. Disruptive burst of flames from the eyes, to fly, and in rare cases for a powerful ability known as the Crown of Fire. And that was Spellfire. So Silverfire was comprised of the pure so it was composed of the pure magic energy of the weave. Thus, the clashing of Silverfire with pure shadow magic could tear the fabric of the multiverse, causing huge dimensional rifts between the planes. So yeah, this was like
no freaking joke.
Yeah. So usage less than once an hour. Chosen of Mystara could unleash a beam of whitish magical flame known as Silver Fire. These beams were 5 feet wide, and could be made to extend as far as 70 feet if desired. No magical or physical barrier had ever been discovered that could stand up against Silver Fire, and the beam inflicted tremendous damage on all beings struck. Any non-living object touched by the beams were utterly destroyed. An individual was able to expel their silver fire in the shape of a cloud that filled a cone-shaped area 5 feet in diameter at its base, up to 70 feet long, and up to 70 feet across at its widest. The silver cloud caused no damage, but banished dead magic areas forever, instantly restoring such an area's connection with the goddess of all magic. This use of the silver fire was extremely rare since Mystara considered its usage an emergency action only.
So it revitalized an area and put magic back in it?
Yes, because there were, technically after the Cataclysm, there were still areas of dead magic, so this would be where the Chosen would go in and revamp it.
Got it.
So Silver Visor could be activated within the body of a Chosen to purge all external magical and psionic compulsions from that person once per from that person. So basically, kind of a purge or a purification. And then once per day, an individual could teleport without error to the last location where it used its silver fire in any manner.
Does that supersede? Because okay, the weave touches everything, right?
Yeah.
So if it touches different crystal spheres, it has to permeate the.
And I would think that Mystara has probably enough power to permeate through most crystal spheres. Yeah. So there's one of your reasons why, yes, that would permeate beyond. Because we're talking about magic that is specifically of the weave that supersedes a teleportation spell. You're literally using the weave itself, which is everywhere. So yeah, that's one of those options.
That's so crazy. That's so crazy. That's dope.
Oh, so here's another thing, probably another influence that you've heard from me before. A portion of the Chosen's silver fire could be used to hold the knowledge of how to cast a particular spell within a Chosen's mind. While held in this way, these spells could be cast by silent force of will alone without the need of verbal, somatical, or material components.
So it's like you precast it and you just like hold a spot in your mind.
You've seen that happen before in my realm.
Yes, I have.
I've had that idea for a long time. I can see where I've got it from. But yeah, though, so that is kind of cool that again, because it is the power of the weave, it's not just a attack. It is, you can use it to literally memorize spells and just have them ready to go and cast without anything. Kind of like a psionicist can.
That's so crazy.
So yeah, Spellfire versus Silverfire. It looks like Silverfire is more powerful in terms of raw power.
Mm-hmm.
And then
nothing known to be able to stand up against it, and Spellfire is known.
Yeah, so Spellfire is available, but Silverfire is only of Mystara, so it's definitely bigger. Oh, hey, look at this. Spellfire versus Silverfire. That's its own section. While both Spellfire and Silverfire originate from the same raw energy of the weave, they didn't have exactly the same effect. Spellfire was pure raw energy, while Silverfire was a power granted to the Chosen of Mystara to channel the weave's energy in a more subtle way. So Spellfire was introduced to and showcased. Okay, so how you want to interpret that, I'm looking at like the uses of it, because in terms of Spellfire, its uses are to absorb magic cast at you, internally convert it to raw energy, and then reuse it to heal, project bursts of flames from your eyes, to fly, and then possibly get the Crown of Fire, which is what exactly? It actually doesn't talk about that, which is funny. But compare that to Silverfire, which they can basically destroy almost anything in creation and just blast holes and shit and kill almost anything. Right. So I think Silverfire is probably more specifically used.
Yeah, and I think that might be because, again, like they said, it's specifically granted by Mystara for their followers to do specific tasks.
And the idea that you can absorb magic and then use it in a myriad of ways also just opens up the possibility of, let's talk about what that means.
Yeah, exactly. Because, they give you some examples, but they don't necessarily say those are the only things you could do.
Yeah.
Okay, no, I'm here for it. That was most of what I wanted to go over.
Fantastic. Good timing.
Wailing Years, the World Trees, some phlogiston, and definitely finding out about the holodeck.
We'll have to do another episode. You'll have to talk to me more about my like high points lore on the ancients and the phlogiston and the crystal spheres. Like that is because again, I feel like those are vague for people to take control of, and I definitely have. So I have what I consider the high point lore of what the ancients were all about, why they created the crystal spheres and the phlogiston and what that's all for. But I don't say that is obviously D&D canon. That's high point canon.
Right.
But okay, so I think that's going to be where we leave it off. That was fantastic. Thank you for all the questions. I really do appreciate it. For all of you out there, we appreciate you joining us. If you like what you heard and missed anything, or if you want to catch any of our previous streams, you can catch us on YouTube at MisfitGamersStudios. Moving forward after this week, you'll be able to catch D&D discussions every Monday and Friday at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. This Friday we're going to skip because that was for today. So starting next week, Mondays and Fridays for D&D discussions. And you can catch me on the weekends doing RPGs and DBD, and just a bunch of other games that I do pop-ups on the weekends for. So other than that, I hope you guys had a great start to your week. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and catch me this weekend for some more gameplay, and then Kage will be back with me on Monday for more D&D discussions. So have a fantastic week, and we will catch you all later.
Deuces, my friends.